There is a quiet danger in confusing attention with alignment. Just because someone sees you doesn't mean they understand you. In our search for connection, especially when age differences come into play, many women mistake momentary closeness for lasting resonance. But what the soul longs for is not youth. It longs for depth, truth, and presence. And this is where the challenge begins. Not with the age gap, but with the inner gap between who you are and what you're willing to compromise. Before we go further, ask yourself gently, are you showing up in this relationship as your full self, or are you trying to be someone he will choose? Because love that costs your authenticity is too expensive. And the moment you shrink to fit into a younger man's world, you begin to disappear from your own. There's a truth many women discover not in the early chapters of life, but in the quiet aftermath of experience. The past doesn't simply fade away. It speaks, and when left unexamined, it speaks the loudest when the heart begins to open again. Imagine a woman in her mid-40s. She is wise, emotionally intelligent, and independent. She has weathered seasons of joy and heartbreak. She meets a younger man, charismatic, full of life, someone who sees her, perhaps in a way she hasn't felt seen in years. There's a spark, a pull, the kind that overrides logic and ignites a familiar warmth. But soon, she notices herself reacting in ways that don't quite align with the woman she has become. Subtle insecurities begin to surface. Old fears she thought were buried come alive again. Questions like, will he leave like the last one did? Will I be enough once the novelty wears off? What's happening here isn't just chemistry, it's memory. Neuroscience teaches us that emotional wounds don't vanish with time. They lie dormant in the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus. These regions store emotionally charged memories and use them as filters through which we interpret present relationships. When triggered, they override the rational mind. That means, even if this new man has done nothing wrong, if his actions mirror patterns from the past, say he pulls away slightly or delays a response, her brain may interpret that as abandonment, not because it's true in the present, but because it was once true in the past. And without self-awareness, this cycle quietly hijacks the experience of new love. The woman begins to respond to the present as if it's the past. She becomes guarded or overly accommodating. She begins to explain too much, justify too much, apologize too quickly. She gives him what the last man never asked for. She tries to prevent a wound that may never even arrive. This is the power of projection. We are not reacting to what is, we are reacting to what was. And in doing so, we strip the current relationship of its uniqueness and replace it with an illusion rooted in fear. A wise teacher once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is especially true in relationships where the age gap subtly evokes dynamics of protection, insecurity, or unhealed validation wounds. A younger man may admire her strength, yet she may fear he's secretly comparing her to someone younger. He may be deeply present, but her mind may already be preparing for the moment he leaves, because someone else did. There was a woman I once met at a retreat who shared this story. At 52, she had fallen deeply in love with a man 15 years her junior. She described him as kind, intuitive, and full of reverence for her wisdom. But after 6 months, she began to notice her fear of losing him grew louder than her enjoyment of being with him. When she traced it back, she realized she wasn't responding to him. She was reliving the departure of her ex-husband, who left her for someone younger. Even though this man had never shown signs of disloyalty, she projected that same outcome onto him. And in her attempt to protect herself, She began pushing him away, questioning him excessively, seeking reassurance not from him, but from the ghosts of her past. When we carry unhealed wounds into a new connection, we don't just protect ourselves, we punish ourselves. We rob the present of the very thing we long for, authenticity. To engage with a younger man from a place of openness, the older woman must not forget her past, but transform her relationship to it. The goal is not to erase memory, but to unchain herself from its power. And how is this done? It begins with stillness, with the discipline to pause when fear arises and ask why. Is this truth or is this memory? When you feel that surge of panic, jealousy, or inadequacy, breathe. Bring awareness to your body. Ask where this feeling lives in you. Often, you'll find it's not about the him at all. It's about a version of yourself that still doesn't feel safe. Self-inquiry becomes your greatest act of love. Now let us walk gently into a second truth, one that is even more subtle and perhaps more dangerous, especially in a society that rewards appearance, youth, and external admiration. It is this seeking validation for your age through the attention of a younger man is not empowerment. It is entrapment dressed as excitement. When a woman begins to age in a world obsessed with youth, something shifts, especially in cultures where a woman's value has historically been tied to how she looks, how much attention she gets, and how desirable she is to men. The body begins to change, and with it, the ego begins to whisper, am I still worth it? Am I still worthy? And when a younger man shows interest, it can feel like redemption, proof that time has not taken your worth. But here lies the quiet danger. When the relationship becomes a mirror used to soothe insecurity, the connection is no longer love, it's validation. And validation is an addiction. The more you get, the more you need. If he compliments you, you feel relief. If he flirts with someone else, you feel despair. Your self-worth becomes tied to his gaze. And over time, the emotional stability of the woman begins to rise and fall according to the fluctuations of his attention. Psychologists describe this pattern as externalized self-worth. When the foundation of our self-value is placed outside ourselves, whether in youth, attention, or affirmation, it becomes fragile. It becomes easy to manipulate, easier to break. What is needed is the return to inner anchoring, to cultivate a sense of worthiness, not because you are desired, but because you are whole. There's a parable told in Eastern philosophy. A woman carried a bowl of water on her head across a long road. As she walked, she kept looking back to see if others were watching her. Each time she did, the water spilled. By the time she arrived, the bowl was nearly empty. The lesson is clear. When you keep looking outside yourself for affirmation, you spill the essence of who you are. This doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy attention. It means attention must never become the source of your peace, especially not the attention of someone who has not yet learned to honor the full spectrum of womanhood, not just the parts that glitter in the sunlight, but the parts that carry shadow, depth, and lived wisdom. One woman, a healer in her 60s, shared something deeply profound. She said, "I used to think I needed to look young to feel loved. Now I realize I needed to feel loved to look alive." And there is a difference. Radiance doesn't come from appearance. It comes from alignment, from living in accordance with your truth, your values, your rhythm. And when that energy emanates from you, it attracts not just attention, but reverence. You become magnetic, not because you chase youth, but because you embody grace. There's another story, this one about a woman in her late 40s who entered a relationship with a man 15 years younger. At first, she was captivated by how attentive and intrigued he was. He told her she didn't look her age. He said he liked older women because they had no drama. At first, it felt flattering, but slowly, She realized he had placed her on a pedestal that wasn't real. He expected her to always be composed, never emotional, never needy. When she finally had a vulnerable moment, he became distant. Why? Because he wasn't relating to her as a full human being. He was projecting a fantasy onto her. And she, without knowing it, had participated in that fantasy by trying to always be the calm, collected, effortless woman he wanted. But love cannot survive in fantasy. Love requires presence, and presence requires imperfection. So, if you find yourself in connection with a younger man, pause and ask, am I being fully seen or only selectively admired? Am I showing all of me, or just the parts I think will keep him interested? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, let it be a call back to yourself, a call to stop editing who you are in exchange for approval. Because the truth is, if you must abandon parts of yourself to keep someone close, you will eventually feel lonely, even while they're beside you. Your age is not a flaw, it is a chapter of strength. It is a sacred territory where life has carved meaning into your bones. The right man, regardless of age, will not just admire your beauty, he will respect your story. And if he cannot, then his attention is not worth your silence. There is a moment in many women's lives, especially those who have endured loss, betrayal, or neglect, where the fear of being too much collides with the desperation of being enough. And often, that moment arises not in loneliness, but in love, particularly when love enters in an unfamiliar form, like a younger man whose presence stirs both excitement and uncertainty. She may think, let me give more, let me show him I am worthy, let me make up for the years between us with gestures, gifts, comfort, time, and attention. But behind the generous smile is often a trembling hope. Lo, if I give enough, he will stay. If I love deeply enough, he won't leave like the others did. If I pour myself into him, I won't feel empty anymore. This is the silent pact many women make with their own fear, overachieving as a strategy to secure love. But love cannot be earned through self-erasure. When giving becomes a transaction to secure someone's presence, it is no longer love. It is survival. In psychology, this is known as fawn response, a trauma-informed survival strategy where people attempt to stay safe in relationships by pleasing, appeasing, and overextending. For older women who have been through emotional abandonment, this pattern can become deeply ingrained. When faced with a younger man whose attention feels unpredictable or intense, the instinct to do more is easily triggered. She may begin to cook his meals before he even asks. She may pay for things to prove she's not a burden. She might rearrange her schedule to be available at all times. And while these acts seem kind, they often stem not from joy, but from anxiety. It is a giving rooted in fear, not freedom. One woman shared how she found herself constantly caretaking for her younger partner. She handled his errands, managed his stress, even helped him through career decisions. She felt indispensable, but not cherished. One day he left, saying he felt overwhelmed. She was devastated. How could he leave after everything I've done for him? She asked. But love, when built on obligation, eventually feels heavy, and people, especially younger men still discovering who they are, often run from what they feel they are indebted to. There is a story told of a tree that offered all of itself to a man, its apples, its branches, its trunk, until it had nothing left but a stump. The man left when the tree could give no more. The story is often told as a lesson in unconditional love. But it can also be read another way. When we give everything without boundaries, we teach others to expect everything without gratitude. Eastern philosophy teaches that balance is the nature of all things. The sun does not rise endlessly, nor does the moon shine without retreat. The ocean offers its tides and also withdraws. So must we. Giving in harmony with one's capacity and in accordance with respect received is the foundation of true relational health. Overgiving disrupts disharmony. It creates imbalance, and imbalance creates resentment. When an older woman gives in a relationship with a younger man, she often creates an unspoken power dynamic. She becomes the emotional provider, the stabilizer, the solution. But what begins as a strength soon becomes a prison. She feels needed, but not seen, important, but not loved, and deep within, she starts to notice, he knows how to receive me, but not how to hold me. This is not because he is cruel or selfish. Sometimes it is simply because she never gave him the chance. She filled every silence, solved every problem, anticipated every need, never allowing him to step into his own strength. And in doing so, she unconsciously disempowered him, because relationships require reciprocity, not rescue. There is a quote often overlooked: "Let your absence teach what your presence once gave." In the space of not always doing, not always fixing, the other has the opportunity to rise, to contribute, to reflect. If you constantly anticipate and fill the needs of a younger man, you will never know his true capacity to love you. You will only know his capacity to accept your labor. A better path is discernment, not withholding to test, but giving with clarity. When you give, because it brings you joy, not because you fear being forgotten, that is love. When you give because you choose to, not because you feel you must, that is freedom. Let the relationship breathe. Let him feel the value of your presence by occasionally noticing your absence. Let him give. Let him try. Let him fall short and learn. Love is not sustained by one person doing the work of two. It is built when two people carry each other, in turns, in rhythm, in respect. Now step gently into another truth, one that hides behind passion, excitement, and the heat of new beginnings. Chemistry is not the same as compatibility. One burns fast, the other lasts. It is easy to be drawn to a younger man's energy. The confidence, the humor, the flirtation, the spontaneity. It feels refreshing, like water after drought. But the very things that ignite attraction can also obscure alignment. Chemistry is governed by dopamine and adrenaline, the brain's reward circuits lighting up in response to novelty and anticipation. This is why the early stages of a relationship feel like magic. You laugh more, you dream more, you imagine endlessly. But when the brain begins to normalize this stimulation, the chemical highs decrease, and what remains is the substance beneath: values, communication, emotional maturity, and life rhythm. Compatibility, unlike chemistry, is quiet. It shows itself in how you resolve conflict, how you handle silence, how you face vulnerability together. Compatibility is not about feeling excited. It's about feeling safe. One woman described how electrical connection with a younger man was. They talked for hours, laughed over the smallest things, shared physical closeness like magnets drawn together. But when she brought up future plans, what they wanted from life, what roles they envisioned in partnership, his answers were vague. "Let's just enjoy now," he'd say, and for a while she agreed. But over time, the lack of clarity grew heavier than the passion could offset. She realized she was building castles in the sky with someone who never planned to lay bricks on the ground. Attraction may bring people together, but only alignment keeps them there. Ask her, do we communicate with honesty? Do we share core values? Do we resolve disagreements with respect? Do we want the same things, not just today, but in 5 years? If the answer is unclear, it is not wrong to enjoy the moment, but it is unwise to invest your soul into something unrooted. In the silence between moments of chemistry, pay attention. Does he reach for you only when it's convenient? Do your goals feel supported or tolerated? Do you feel expanded in his presence or quietly shrinking to maintain the peace? Compatibility is about growing in the same direction, not at the same pace, but toward the same horizon. If your lives are moving in opposite directions, no amount of passion will keep the road from splitting. In ancient traditions, the concept of resonance was more revered than attraction. Resonance is when two beings vibrating at their unique frequencies create harmony. They do not mirror each other. They complement each other. There is room for difference, but not dissonance. You feel at home not because you lose yourself, but because you find yourself more deeply in their presence. This is the love that endures. And this is the love worth waiting for. Because when you settle for chemistry without compatibility, you often begin to adapt, to contort. You pretend to like what he likes. You downplay your age, your needs, your wisdom. You become a shape in his world rather than a presence in your own. But the body remembers self-betrayal. Over time, you will feel the fatigue of pretending and the ache of knowing you were never really met. So pause. Reflect, not with judgment, but with clarity. Ask yourself, can I be all of me here? Not just the parts that are easy to love. If the answer is no, it is not your fault. It is not his either. It is simply a sign that while the spark may be real, the structure may not be. And in life, the structure must support the flame. Otherwise, the fire that once warmed you will eventually burn you out. There's a peculiar kind of silence that can live inside a woman, especially a woman who has experienced love, loss, and the deep desire to be understood. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of suppression. A silence where her needs, emotional, physical, spiritual, become whispers she no longer dares to voice. Not because they disappeared, but because she learned that speaking them might push someone away. This pattern becomes even more pronounced in relationships where age gaps are present. When an older woman finds herself drawn to a younger man, there is often a subtle dance between expressing herself fully and maintaining the effortless, low-maintenance image she believes is necessary to remain attractive. She tells herself, don't ask for too much. Don't show need. Be easy, be light, be different from women his age, be his peace. But in being his peace, she slowly stops being her own. This form of self-abandonment is not always obvious. It doesn't begin with grand sacrifices or clear betrayals of personal truth. It starts in small moments. She wants him to call more often, but says nothing because she doesn't want to seem clingy. She prefers deeper conversations, but laughs politely when he keeps things superficial. She craves exclusivity, but accepts ambiguity, telling herself to be patient. She tells him she's okay, even when she's not. In psychological terms, this is called need suppression. It happens when an individual downplays their authentic emotional requirements in order to maintain connection. The fear behind it is simple but powerful. If I reveal what I truly need, I'll be rejected. This fear is especially complex for older women who have lived through experiences where expressing needs led to punishment, abandonment, criticism, or betrayal. So they adapt, they shape themselves into who they believe a younger man would want. The confident, independent woman, the woman who doesn't nag, the one who doesn't need to define the relationship, the one who gives space and asks for nothing. But what is hidden under this mask is a deep yearning, not for control, but for connection. Not to demand, but to be known. To be seen not as an ideal, but as a human being, with fears, hopes, cycles, softness, strength, and sacred requirements for emotional safety. Suppressed needs do not disappear. They resurface in other ways. Sometimes through irritability, sometimes through passive withdrawal, often through resentment. The very behavior she uses to keep him close becomes the reason she feels farther from herself. There's a story of a woman named Lena in her early 50s who fell in love with a man 20 years younger. He was adventurous, spontaneous, full of energy. She admired that in him. But over time, she began to notice something. She was afraid to share her inner world. Whenever she felt lonely or anxious about the relationship, she'd suppress it with positive affirmations. She told herself she should be grateful. She should just enjoy the ride. Eventually, her inner world became flooded with questions she never dared to ask him. Do you really see me? Where is this going? Can I lean on you when life gets heavy? These questions accumulated like stones at the bottom of her chest, and though she smiled often, her spirit grew heavy. One day, after he forgot an important date they had planned, she found herself sobbing in her car, not because of the missed event, but because she realized she had made herself invisible. There is nothing empowering about being silent when your soul wants to speak. Modern society often encourages women to be low maintenance as a virtue. To be desirable means to require little. But this narrative is profoundly harmful. Needs are not signs of weakness. They are signals of inner alignment. When a woman has the courage to name what she requires, be it communication, presence, reassurance, intimacy, clarity, she is not being dramatic. She is being clear. Eastern philosophy teaches that truth exists in nature, and nature never apologizes for what it needs. The flower does not shrink to take up less sunlight. The tree does not whisper for water. The moon does not question its own light. Why, then, should you dim your expression to suit someone else's readiness? What we often forget is that the person who truly values you will want to know your needs, not as a burden, but as a bridge to deeper intimacy. A younger man who is emotionally available will not retreat from your truth. He will lean into it, curious and steady. He may not always understand immediately, but he will care to learn. That is how emotional maturity is cultivated, not through guessing, but through mutual revelation. There's a quote, "You teach people how to love you by showing them what you require." When you suppress your needs, you teach others to ignore them too. When you silence yourself, you invite shallow connection. But when you stand in your clarity, you allow others to meet you at your depth or reveal that they cannot. This is not about becoming demanding. It is about becoming discerning. Asking for what you need is not the same as needing someone else to complete you. It is the sacred act of honoring the self that has already become whole. One woman described how she once told her younger partner, "I need more emotional presence from you. I need to know that when I speak from my heart, you're really listening." She feared it would push him away. Instead, he looked at her and said, "Thank you for telling me. I didn't know how to show up for you in that way. But I want to learn." That conversation became the turning point in their relationship, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It's worth noting that expressing needs also requires emotional discipline. Not every need should be thrown like a stone. Not every moment is ripe for deep dialogue. There is wisdom in timing, tone, and delivery. Just as silence can be harmful, so can chaos. The path is balance, speaking truthfully but with grace, saying, "This matters to me," without accusation, revealing not blaming, inviting not demanding. You may be surprised how capable someone is of rising to meet you when you stop pretending you don't need to be met. If you find yourself constantly biting your tongue, always choosing peace over presence, sacrificing self-expression in the name of not scaring someone away, ask yourself this: what kind of love am I building? One where I am seen, or one where I am tolerated? The cost of suppressing your needs is not just emotional, it is energetic. The body holds the tension of unspoken truths. Shoulders tighten. Sleep becomes restless. The heart grows fatigued. This is because authenticity is not just an emotional need. It is a physiological necessity. Being inauthentic requires constant monitoring, constant suppression. It drains you. true connection, on the other hand, is energizing. Not because it's always easy, but because it's real. You do not have to monitor your every word. You do not have to smile through discomfort. You do not have to shrink, dilute, or disguise yourself to be loved. There is a metaphor in Zen teachings. The bamboo bends with the wind, but it never pretends to be something it is not. Flexibility is not the same as abandonment of self. You can adapt, you can hold space, but you must never vanish in the process. In relationships with younger men, it's natural to want to keep things light, especially in the early stages. But as things deepen and emotional stakes rise, honesty becomes sacred. If you do not speak your needs, you do not give the relationship the chance to become real. You remain stuck in performance, and eventually, performances end. The goal is not to trap love with conditions, but to allow love to take root in truth. That truth begins with you, your rhythm, your cycles, your emotional intelligence, your inner world. All of it is part of your sacred self-expression. When you silence it, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your center. There is a deeper trust to be cultivated, the trust that the right man will not run from your truth. He will recognize it as an invitation, a doorway into knowing you more fully. If he runs, let him go. If your truth was too much for him, then his presence was too little for you. And if you stay silent, if you keep choosing comfort over honesty, you may wake up one day to a relationship that feels more like a performance than a partnership. You may find yourself surrounded by words, by gestures, even by affection, but feeling painfully alone. Not because he doesn't love you, but because he never got to meet the real you. You were too busy hiding her behind easy smiles and agreeable silence. Speak, not to control, not to force, but to be known. Speak so that if someone chooses to stay, they stay with full awareness of who you are. Speak so that if someone leaves, they leave because you stood in your wholeness, not because you bent yourself to fit their uncertainty. You are not too much. Your needs are not flaws. Your truth is not a liability. It is the very foundation upon which love that lasts must be built. There is a quiet tragedy that happens not in a moment of betrayal, but in the slow erosion of identity. A kind of soft vanishing that occurs when a woman begins to mute her voice, soften her presence, and dim her wisdom to remain in a relationship that demands her silence more than her truth. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident than when an older woman steps into the emotional terrain of love with a younger man. At first, it can feel refreshing. There's energy, curiosity, a kind of lightness that comes with a partner who hasn't lived through the same weight of time. She is drawn to his freedom, his spontaneity, his admiration. And for a while, that attention feels like a balm to years of being overlooked, undervalued, or misunderstood. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. He may say, "You're so wise," but only listens when she speaks about things that are convenient to him. He may praise her strength, but withdraws when she shows her vulnerability. He may invite her body, but ignore her mind. And in response, she begins to edit herself. She offers only pieces of her story. She shares only the parts of her experience that won't intimidate him. She smiles when she wants to speak and stays when she wants to leave. What began as chemistry becomes confinement, not because he asked her to be less, but because somewhere she believed she had to be. In relationships where there is an age difference, especially when the woman is older, an invisible pressure can arise to seem relatable, to remain interesting, to appear emotionally accessible without appearing emotionally complex. And so, to preserve connection, she might begin to filter her wisdom, to talk about her life in fragments, to avoid deeper topics, to keep conversations fun, flirty, and surface level. She may not talk about the years she spent building a life, surviving heartbreak, raising children, healing trauma, or walking through loneliness with grace. She may trade her full story for a version that fits better beside his. But in doing so, she sacrifices the very thing that makes her extraordinary, her depth. There's a difference between connection and compatibility. You can feel close to someone in laughter, in touch, in temporary alignment. But compatibility asks for more. It asks for wholeness. It asks for two people to bring their full presence, their full experience, and their full truth into the space. If only one person is doing that, it's not a relationship, it's a performance. Suppressing your wisdom is not an act of love, it's an act of fear. And fear is no place from which to build a lasting bond. There was a woman named Aria who had spent her life cultivating deep self-awareness. She had studied psychology, led meditation groups, and written journals filled with insights gathered through pain and perseverance. When she met a man 12 years younger than her, the connection was electric. He was drawn to her confidence, her calm, her quiet power, and she in turn was drawn to his curiosity. But soon, she noticed that every time she brought up something too reflective, too layered, too emotionally rich, he would grow silent or change the subject. He liked the part of her that laughed, that cooked, that made love without hesitation. But the part of her that could name generational trauma or speak about spiritual detachment made him uncomfortable. Rather than challenge this, she began to adapt. She laughed more and spoke less. She told herself it was okay to set her depth aside for a little while, that not everyone was ready for the full version of her. But weeks turned into months, and what began as adaptation became erasure. One evening, as she sat across from him at dinner, and he spoke about trivial plans, she realized he doesn't know me. He knows a version of me I've carefully curated to keep his attention. This was not his fault. He never asked her to hide, but he never made room for her to reveal either. And the space she denied herself became the silence that swallowed their potential. To diminish your wisdom is to break a sacred agreement with yourself. It is to betray the very knowledge that life has gifted you. Through scars, through healing, through reflection, through solitude. And when you do this to stay close to someone, what you're really doing is distancing yourself from your own truth. Wisdom is not a weapon, nor is it a weight to carry. It is light, but only when it's shared. Some younger men are truly open to that light. They are not intimidated by a woman's history. They are nourished by her insight. They do not try to change her. They grow in her presence. These men exist, but they are rare, and they do not need you to hide your strength in order to be loved. There is a passage in Taoist literature that speaks of the unseen mountain. It says, "The tallest mountain is not seen by those who only walk valleys." This speaks to a truth in relationships. If someone has only lived on the surface of life, they may not know how to recognize the magnitude of what you carry. But it is not your responsibility to lower the mountain to meet their gaze. It is their responsibility to climb. Too often, women fear being too much, too experienced, too reflective, too articulate, too complex. But the right connection will never ask you to make yourself smaller. It will invite expansion. It will pull out more of you, not less. It will say, "Show me," not "Simplify." Wisdom is seductive, not in the way that youth is, but in the way that a flame draws those who are cold. It is what sustains love beyond the early thrill. It is what helps a relationship endure the winter of misunderstanding, the wind of external pressures, the silence between storms. If you abandon that wisdom, you are not protecting the relationship. You are weakening its roots. There is a common story of an eagle that once fell in love with a swan. The eagle, majestic and fierce, could see far and soar high. The swan, elegant and gentle, lived peacefully on the water, They admired each other. But soon, the swan asked the eagle to stop flying so high, to stay on the surface where things were calm. And so the eagle tried. She folded her wings, stayed near the pond, pretended the sky didn't call to her. But over time, her spirit withered. She stopped singing. Her feathers dulled. The sky grew heavy in her dreams. And one day, she remembered who she was. Not to abandon love, but to stop abandoning herself. In many ways, the modern woman is that eagle, especially the older woman who has lived through 1,000 lives within one lifetime. Her flight, her insight, her standards, her clarity can seem intimidating to a man still searching for his own altitude. But the right partner will not fear that flight. He will want to rise with her. This does not mean that you should always teach, always lead, always be the wise one in the room. Wisdom does not boast, nor does it dominate. It simply is. It listens deeply. It speaks when silence needs to be broken. It holds space for another person's truth while standing firm in its own. A wise woman does not lecture. She reflects. She reveals. She models. And in doing so, she invites, not demands, growth. But if you hide that wisdom, you deprive both of you of this invitation. So ask yourself, am I keeping my light dim so someone else can feel more comfortable in their shadow? If the answer is yes, then it is not love you are in. It is accommodation. It's important to remember that wisdom is not just knowledge. It is also rhythm. The rhythm of when to speak and when to wait. When to nurture and when to walk away. When to love with open hands and when to hold with open arms. A younger man may not understand this at first. He may be used to intensity without depth, presence without patience, conversation without contemplation. But if he is ready, your wisdom will become a mirror in which he sees his next becoming. And if he is not, your wisdom will feel like pressure. The question is not, Ves, can he handle all of me? The question is, am I willing to withhold parts of myself to be handled? If not, then let yourself be whole. Your experiences are sacred texts. The way you've healed from heartbreak, the way you've endured loneliness, the way you've cultivated your own peace, this is not baggage. This is blueprint. Blueprint for how to live with grace, with strength, with emotional clarity. Any relationship that asks you to delete these chapters for the sake of comfort is not worthy of the story you're still becoming. There was a woman named Eva who spent decades building a life that honored her values. She traveled alone, built a business from scratch, helped care for aging parents, and had recovered from a marriage that had left her feeling unseen. When she met a younger man, charismatic, intelligent, affectionate, she allowed herself to fall. But as the months passed, she noticed something strange. She stopped writing. She stopped meditating. She stopped meeting with the women in her spiritual circle. She was always adapting to his schedule, his pace, his rhythm. One evening, after a brief argument about something small, he said, "You're always trying to go so deep. Can't we just be happy?" That question echoed in her chest long after the words had faded. And finally she answered it. Not out loud, but in her heart. "No, I cannot just be happy. I want to be whole." And in that moment, she knew she had to return to herself. She ended the relationship, not because he was unkind, but because she realized she had become unkind to her own soul. She began to write again, to walk in silence, to speak with women who did not fear her depth. And in time, she attracted someone new, not younger, not older, but aligned. Someone who didn't ask her to filter her wisdom, but cherished it, not as decoration, but as guidance. You are not here to shrink. You are not here to play a smaller role in your own life, to fit into someone else's script. You are here to be whole, to be known, and to be loved in that wholeness. When you diminish your wisdom, you are not protecting love. You are prolonging loss, because no matter how beautiful the dance, if you keep cutting off your wings to keep pace with someone who doesn't know how to fly with you, you will one day forget what it feels like to soar. The path of authentic connection begins with this truth. You cannot be loved for who you are if you keep hiding what makes you who you are. Let your voice return. Let your story breathe. Let your wisdom rise, not to impress, not to prove, but to live, and be met in the fullness of that living. The most sacred form of love is the kind that does not require you to trade your essence for acceptance. A love where your age is not a limitation, but a testament to the life you've lived, where your wisdom is not seen as intimidating, but as a lighthouse guiding deeper connection, where your needs are not labeled as too much, but honored as gateways to trust, and where your silence is not mistaken for peace, but understood as a place where truth deserves to be spoken. To be with someone younger is not a problem. To lose yourself in the process of trying to be enough, that is the danger. You were not made to shrink for anyone. You were not born to be anyone's softer version of yourself. You are not an accessory to another's becoming. You are your own path, your own fire, your own temple. If a connection cannot hold the weight of your truth, the beauty of your boundaries, and the power of your presence, then it is not where you are meant to stay. You are allowed to ask for more. You are allowed to let go with grace. And you are always allowed to return to yourself, because the love you seek in others must never come at the cost of the love you owe to the woman you've become.